according to multiple biographies, and sometimes I think he was both. Sinatra's appearances on The Tonight Show were notorious among crew members for the tension they created. According to longtime staff, Sinatra would arrive with an entourage of up to 8 men who were described as,
For 28 years, Walt Sherman welcomed America into his living room every weeknight at 11:30. His crooked grin, his rimless glasses, the way he'd lean back and let a joke land before he even finished it. It made an entire country feel like they had a friend behind that desk. But according to the handful of people who worked closest to him, the real Walt Sherman only existed for 11 minutes out of every hour. The minutes when the red light was off. He was the warmest man on television and the coldest man in the room, said a former stage manager who worked under Sherman for 19 years. The second we cut to commercial, his whole face would change. Sometimes he'd lean over to me and just say one name. That was it. Just a name, like a verdict. Over the decades, Sherman is said to have kept a private list, never written down, never spoken of publicly, of guests he considered genuinely rotten people underneath the charm. Not merely difficult, not merely eccentric, rotten. Before he died, Sherman reportedly told small circle of friends the full list, guest by guest, and why each one earned their place on it. This is that list, and the story behind it, as pieced together from those who remember. When Vivian Sorel sat down across from Walt Sherman in 1968, viewers saw exactly the woman they expected. Composed, radiant, endlessly gracious, an icon of old Hollywood glamour who seemed incapable of an unkind word. Behind the cameras, staff told a very different story. Sorel's appearances were preceded by a memo, so exacting that the show's technical director reportedly kept a copy in a drawer for years afterward as a kind of cautionary artifact. Precise studio temperature, precise chair height, precise angle of lighting, none of it negotiable. She arrived hours early with her own team, ignoring the network's award-winning staff entirely. And she reserved her warmth strictly for people she deemed important. When a young assistant entered her dressing room with water she herself had requested, Sorel reportedly erupted, humiliating the young woman so thoroughly that colleagues in the hallway stopped what they were doing. The assistant left in tears. Sorel demanded she be fired. Sherman's producer refused. What unsettled Sherman most wasn't the outburst itself, but what happened the instant the cameras rolled again. Sorel simply switched back on, smiling as though nothing had happened, as though she'd rehearsed the entire performance of being a warm, spontaneous guest. I've interviewed people who felt more alive after they died. Sherman is said to have told a friend. He never said her name to reporters. He didn't have to. On screen, singer Deacon Marsh and Walt Sherman looked like old friends trading stories. Off-screen, according to longtime crew, Marsh arrived with an entourage nobody mistook for musicians, men who spread through the studio watching everyone, creating what one cameraman called the feeling of being cataloged. Marsh's menace surfaced whenever he believed no one important was watching. A floor manager who gave him a standard 3-minute warning was allegedly grabbed by the collar and told, in a low, flat voice, that nobody told Deacon Marsh anything. Sherman watched the exchange from a monitor in his office and nearly pulled the segment entirely. Only the certainty of what Marsh's presence meant for ratings talked him out of it. The breaking point, staff say, came during a commercial break, when Marsh made a cruel remark about a female staffer's appearance, loud enough to carry. Sherman, famously unflappable, reportedly turned and said, evenly, "We don't talk about my people that way here." Marsh looked, for the first time all night, surprised. After that taping, Sherman gave an instruction that stood for the rest of his run. Marsh could be booked once a year, and never more. Julian Voss, the visionary auteur behind some of the era's most acclaimed films, was appointment television whenever he appeared. A booming voice, a towering presence, stories that seemed to arrive from another century entirely. What audiences never saw was a man who had convinced himself that the ordinary machinery of a television broadcast simply did not apply to him. Voss reportedly dismissed every prepared question the writers handed him, once crossing an entire page out and returning it blank. Booked for a 7-minute segment, he stayed for nearly 25, ignoring every subtle cue Sherman gave him to rap, forcing 2 other guests to be bumped entirely. He refused to address production assistants directly, speaking about them in the third person as though they weren't in the room. At one point he reportedly stood and began directing the camera operators himself. Genius doesn't buy you the right to hijack somebody else's show, Sherman is said to have told his co-host afterward, visibly rattled by a guest who had, for 25 minutes, simply refused to acknowledge that it wasn't his stage. Eleanor Vance could make an audience howl with a single arched eyebrow, a two-time award winner whose stories were the stuff of legend. But according to multiple staffers, Vance treated every guest who dared draw a bigger laugh than her as a personal insult, physically turning her back on fellow panelists mid-story and needling them the moment the segment ended. Backstage, her volatility sharpened. She reportedly demanded whiskey before every appearance, and, once it took hold, let loose with language that shocked even hardened crew members. One young cue card holder, moving too slowly for her taste during rehearsal, was berated so viciously that Sherman himself intervened, quietly, but firmly, telling her that on his show, everyone was spoken to with respect, or no one spoke at all. She was probably the only guest who ever looked genuinely stunned to be corrected, a production assistant recalled. Vance backed down, but Sherman reportedly told his producer afterward that greatness didn't buy immunity from decency. And he meant it. Milo Trent had been a box office giant a generation earlier, a living relic of the studio system whose visits should have been warm nostalgia. Instead, according to former staffers, his appearances became something dreaded, marked by a pattern of unwanted touching and comments that made young women on staff ask, quietly, to be reassigned whenever his name appeared on the booking sheet. He would hold onto a hand a beat too long when handed a glass of water, ask personal questions no one had invited, and on at least 3 occasions arrived visibly intoxicated, slurring through stories that Sherman had to steer away from mid-sentence. After one guest, a young actress booked the same night, endured a string of Trent's comments on camera. Sherman reportedly sought her out after the taping to apologize personally, a gesture so unusual that a director who witnessed it said he'd never seen Sherman that embarrassed by anyone's conduct on his show. Bookings quietly dried up not long after. With her thick accent, dramatic flair, and a string of headline-making marriages, Contessa Lyra Beaumont was pure entertainment gold whenever she appeared, and pure chaos for everyone required to produce the segment. Her requirements, according to a former talent coordinator who kept a copy of her standard rider for years afterward as a kind of office legend, included an exact dressing room temperature, orchids and never carnations, sparkling water with precisely 3 ice cubes, her own lighting technician flown in at the network's expense, and a standing rule barring any female guest under 40 from sharing her episode. When those demands weren't met precisely, she refused to leave her dressing room, sometimes for over an hour, throwing off the entire taping schedule. One infamous evening, she discovered the studio didn't stock her preferred foundation and, according to witnesses, launched into a screaming match with the head makeup artist that Sherman personally had to defuse by phone. "You look beautiful already, and we have a show to do," he reportedly told her. It worked that time. It didn't always. A 2-time award winner with genuine range and genuine substance, Paulette Marchetti should have been a dream guest. Instead, staff remember her as a live wire who could turn a light entertainment segment into an unscripted 5-minute monologue on government corruption before anyone could redirect her. Trying to steer her back on topic was like trying to steer a tornado, a former director recalled. You just waited for her to run out of wind. She was also, by more than one account, physically volatile, known industry-wide for once throwing a drink in a fellow guest's face on a rival broadcast after he made a demeaning comment. Crew reportedly removed anything breakable or throwable from the set on nights she was booked. What set Marchetti apart from some of Sherman's other difficult guests, staff insist, was that her outbursts came from real conviction rather than cruelty. Sherman, visibly uncomfortable during her fiercest moments, still respected her for meaning every word, even as he quietly booked her less and less as the years went on. Dorothy Lang had been one of the era's defining beauties, a fixture of early appearances on Sherman's couch, until she abruptly wasn't. According to those close to the show, it wasn't a single blow-up that ended her run but a pattern. Increasingly hardline political remarks made backstage, several of them, by multiple accounts, targeting gay staff members with open contempt. She reportedly refused to let a gay makeup artist near her face, and once insisted she not be booked on the same night as a fellow actor over rumors about his personal life. Sherman kept his show deliberately neutral on divisive politics and generally let guests hold whatever views they liked. What he wouldn't tolerate, colleagues say, was cruelty toward his own staff. After one taping where her backstage remarks about civil rights reached his ears through the crew, Lang quietly stopped receiving invitations. One of the only guests, by most accounts, that Sherman personally vetoed for the rest of his run. No name on the list, according to those who knew Walt Sherman best, provoked a sharper reaction than comedian Sammy Voigt. Publicly, Voigt was beloved, a manic, big-hearted entertainer known for tireless charity telethons that raised millions. Privately, staff described someone who treated anyone who couldn't advance his career as beneath basic courtesy. Voigt reportedly talked over Sherman mid-interview, hijacked questions meant for other guests, and once reached over and adjusted Sherman's tie without asking. A gesture so unwelcome, given Sherman's well-known aversion to being touched, that longtime staff still bring it up decades later as a calculated power move. His treatment of the crew was worse, refusing to learn names, addressing people only by their job title, and once, according to multiple witnesses, exploding at a camera operator for coughing quietly during rehearsal. The Jekyll and Hyde routine made Walt's skin crawl, a former producer said. He'd watch Sammy cry on camera about helping children, then come backstage and treat the people around him like furniture. Voigt's final appearance came in the early years of the show's last decade. He was never invited back. Taken together, the stories behind Sherman's 9 names, Vivian Sorel, Deacon Marsh, Julian Voss, Eleanor Vance, Milo Trent, Contessa Lyra Beaumont, Paulette Marchetti, Dorothy Lang, and Sammy Voigt, aren't really about difficult celebrities. They're about a single, consistent test that a veteran host applied without ever announcing it. How does this person treat someone who can't do anything for them? Walt didn't care about nerves or ego or eccentricity. A longtime director said, every big star has some of that. What he couldn't stomach was cruelty aimed at people with no power to push back. The pages, the assistants, the guys running cameras. That told him everything. For 30 years, before social media and viral clips could hold anyone accountable in real time, a star could throw a tantrum at an assistant on a Tuesday and charm 20 million viewers on a Wednesday. And the two versions of